The sun was just beginning to rise over the city when Amara Williams pulled into the courthouse parking lot. She checked her watch and smiled. 6:45 in the morning. She had plenty of time before her 9 o'clock hearing. The early morning air was cool and fresh as she stepped out of her car, carrying her briefcase in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. Amara was dressed in a navy blue pantsuit with comfortable flats. She planned to change into her judge's robes once she reached her chambers, just like she did every morning. At 38 years old, she was one of the youngest judges in the district. She had worked hard to get here, spending 15 years as a prosecutor and then a defense attorney before her appointment to the bench 6 months ago. The downtown courthouse was a large gray building with tall columns at the entrance. Amara usually entered through the private judge's entrance at the side of the building, but that entrance had been closed for renovations for the past 2 weeks. All the judges had to use the main public entrance until the work was finished. She didn't mind. It reminded her of her days as a lawyer when she walked through these same doors to argue cases. As she approached the main entrance, Amara noticed the courthouse was already busy. Even at this early hour, people were arriving for their court dates. Some looked nervous, clutching folders and papers. Others talked quietly with their lawyers on the front steps. Security guards stood at their posts watching everyone who entered. Amara walked up the stone steps and pulled open the heavy glass door. The lobby was large with high ceilings and marble floors that made every footstep echo. She recognized several court clerks and attorneys already inside preparing for their day. A few nodded at her in greeting. She smiled back and headed toward the security checkpoint. The metal detector stood in the center of the lobby with 2 security officers stationed nearby. Amara had been through this checkpoint dozens of times in the past 2 weeks. She placed her briefcase on the conveyor belt for the X-ray machine and walked through the detector. It didn't beep. She collected her briefcase on the other side and continued toward the hallway that led to the courtrooms. What Amara didn't notice was that one of the security officers was watching her closely. Officer Derek Mason had worked at the courthouse for 15 years. He took pride in his job and believed he had a good eye for spotting trouble. He stood near the metal detector with his arms crossed, his eyes following Amara as she walked away. Derek frowned as he watched her. Something didn't seem right to him. She was dressed nicely, but she wasn't wearing the kind of expensive suit he usually saw on lawyers. She was carrying a regular briefcase, not one of those fancy leather ones, and she was walking toward the courtrooms with too much confidence, he thought. Most defendants looked nervous or lost when they first arrived. He had seen hundreds of people come through these doors. He believed he could tell who was who just by looking at them. Lawyers wore expensive suits and carried themselves a certain way. Defendants often looked uncomfortable or worried. Court staff wore identification badges around their necks. This woman didn't fit any of those categories in his mind. Derek stepped away from the metal detector and began following Amara at a distance. He told himself he was just being cautious. It was his job to make sure everyone in the courthouse was supposed to be there. He watched as she turned down the hallway toward the courtrooms on the 4th floor. Amara reached the elevator and pressed the button. She sipped her coffee while she waited, thinking about the cases scheduled for today. The first one was particularly important. A local business owner was accused of fraud, and the case had been in the news for weeks. Both the prosecution and defense had excellent lawyers. It would be a challenging day, but Amara was ready. The elevator doors opened and she stepped inside. Derek Mason quickly walked forward and stepped into the elevator just before the doors closed. Amara glanced at him briefly and gave a polite nod. She pressed the button for the 4th floor. Derek stood in the corner, his eyes never leaving her. When the elevator reached the 4th floor, Amara stepped out and turned left toward courtroom 4C. This was her courtroom. She had presided over dozens of cases here in the past 6 months. The hallway was quiet at this early hour. Most of the other courtrooms wouldn't open for another hour. Derek followed her out of the elevator. His hand moved to rest on his belt near his radio. He watched as Amara walked confidently down the hallway, her heels clicking on the polished floor. When she reached the door marked Courtroom 4C, she stopped and reached for the handle. That's when Derek decided to act. He quickened his pace and called out, "Excuse me, ma'am, I need to speak with you." Amara turned around, surprised to see the security officer approaching her so quickly. She assumed he needed to tell her something about the building or perhaps deliver a message. She smiled politely and said, "Yes, officer? Can I help you?" Derek stopped a few feet away from her, his posture stiff and official. "I need to see some identification," he said firmly. "And I need to know what business you have in this courtroom." Amara's smile faded slightly. She was confused by his tone. "I'm here for work," she said calmly. "This is my courtroom. I'm Judge Williams." Derek's expression didn't change. He looked at her skeptically, his eyes moving from her face to her casual attire and back again. "The judge for this courtroom isn't supposed to arrive through the main entrance," he said. "And you're not dressed like a judge." Amara felt a familiar, uncomfortable feeling settling in her stomach. This wasn't the first time someone had questioned whether she belonged somewhere based on how she looked. But it had never happened here, in her own courthouse at the door of her own courtroom. She kept her voice calm and professional. "The judge's entrance is closed for renovation," she explained. "We've all been using the main entrance for 2 weeks now. I'm about to go into my chambers and put on my robes. If you check with the court administrator or call my clerk, they can verify who I am." Derek shook his head slowly. He had made up his mind about this woman, and nothing she said was going to change it. He had seen people try to talk their way into courtrooms before. He had stopped people who claimed to be lawyers, reporters, and even witnesses when they were really just trying to cause trouble. "I'm going to need to see your identification right now," Derek said, his voice growing harder. "If you really are who you say you are, you'll have proper credentials." Amara set down her coffee on a nearby bench. She shifted her briefcase to her other hand and reached into her jacket pocket, where she kept her judicial identification card. But before she could pull it out, Derek's hand moved toward his radio. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he ordered sharply. Amara froze. The hallway suddenly felt very cold. She slowly raised her hand slightly, still holding her briefcase. "I was reaching for my identification," she said quietly. "You just asked to see it." "I'll tell you when you can reach for something," Derek replied. He pressed the button on his radio. "This is Mason. I need backup on the 4th floor near Courtroom 4C. I have a suspicious individual who may be attempting to impersonate a court official." Amara's heart began to beat faster. This was escalating far beyond a simple misunderstanding. She took a deep breath and spoke clearly and firmly. "Officer, I am Judge Amara Williams. I have been the presiding judge for Courtroom 4C for 6 months. My chambers are right through that door. My clerk will be arriving in about 30 minutes. The court administrator's office can verify my identity with a single phone call. You are making a serious mistake." But Derek Mason had already decided he was right. He had convinced himself that this woman was lying and he wasn't going to let her fool him. He stood between her and the courtroom door, waiting for backup to arrive. In his mind, he was just doing his job. He was protecting the courthouse from someone who didn't belong there. What Derek Mason couldn't see was his own prejudice. He couldn't see how his assumptions about who looked like a judge had clouded his judgment. He couldn't see that he had made up his mind about Amara before she had even spoken a word. And now, that blindness was about to turn a simple morning into something neither of them would ever forget. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway as 2 more security officers responded to Derek Mason's call for backup. Amara stood perfectly still, her hands visible, her briefcase hanging from her fingers. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she kept her face calm. Years of working in courtrooms had taught her how to control her emotions, even when anger and frustration threatened to break through. The 2 officers who arrived looked at the scene with confusion. Officer James Chen had worked at the courthouse for 8 years. Officer Patricia Miller had been there for 5. Both of them slowed down as they approached, sensing that something unusual was happening. "What's the situation, Derek?" James asked, looking between Mason and Amara. Derek kept his eyes on Amara as he spoke. "This woman claims she's the judge for Courtroom 4C. She came through the main entrance without proper identification visible. She was attempting to enter the courtroom, and when I asked for ID, she made a suspicious movement." Amara's jaw tightened. "I did not make a suspicious movement," she said firmly. "Officer Mason asked to see my identification, and I reached for my judicial ID card, which is in my jacket pocket. Before I could show it to him, he ordered me to stop moving." Patricia looked uncomfortable. She glanced at the courtroom door, then back at Amara. Something about this situation didn't feel right to her, but Derek was the senior officer, She wasn't sure if she should speak up. "Ma'am, can you tell us your full name?" James asked, his tone more polite than Derek's had been. "My name is Amara Williams. I am a judge in this district court. I was appointed to the bench 6 months ago, and I have been presiding over Courtroom 4C since then. My chambers are through that door. My clerk, Sarah Mitchell, will arrive in approximately 25 minutes. The court administrator, Michael Chen, can verify my identity, or you can simply look at the nameplate on my chamber's door." Derek shook his head. "Anyone can claim to be someone. I've seen people try to impersonate lawyers, witnesses, even court staff. It's my job to verify everyone's identity, especially when someone is trying to access a courtroom before business hours." "Then look at my identification," Amara said, trying to keep her voice level. "Allow me to show you the judicial ID card in my pocket, or make a phone call to verify who I am. This is a simple matter that can be resolved in 60 seconds. Derek crossed his arms. "I think we need to take you down to the security office for questioning. If you really are who you say you are, we can verify it there." Amara felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. "You want to detain me? A judge? In my own courthouse? At the door to my own courtroom?" "I want to verify your identity through proper channels," Derek insisted. "You need to come with us." James Chen shifted his weight uncomfortably. He had seen Judge Williams before, though he couldn't quite place where. Something about this whole situation seemed wrong to him. "Derek, maybe we should just let her show us her ID," he suggested carefully. Derek glared at him. "I'm the senior officer here. I'll decide how we handle this situation. This woman could be anyone. She could be trying to disrupt court proceedings or access confidential information. We follow protocol." Amara took a slow breath. She had faced prejudice before in her career. She had walked into courtrooms where people assumed she was a defendant or a court reporter rather than a lawyer. She had been questioned at legal conferences, asked if she was in the right place. But this was different. This was happening in her own courthouse, where she held one of the highest positions. This was happening because a security officer had looked at her and decided she couldn't possibly be a judge. "Officer Mason," Amara said quietly, "I want you to think carefully about what you're doing right now. I understand that security is important. I appreciate that you take your job seriously. But you are making a serious error in judgment. You have refused to look at my identification. You have refused to make a simple phone call. You are threatening to detain a sitting judge based on nothing more than your own assumptions about what a judge should look like." Derek's face flushed red. "This has nothing to do with what you look like. This is about following security protocols." "Then follow them," Amara replied. "Your protocol should include verifying someone's identity by looking at their credentials. I have offered to show you mine multiple times. You have refused." A few people had started to gather at the far end of the hallway. 2 lawyers arriving early for case preparation stopped and watched. A court clerk carrying a stack of files slowed down, trying to figure out what was happening. Word was beginning to spread that something unusual was taking place outside Courtroom 4C. Patricia Miller leaned closer to Derek and whispered, "Maybe we should call Captain Harris. Let her make the decision about how to handle this." Derek shook his head stubbornly. "I don't need the captain to tell me how to do my job. Ma'am, you need to come with us now. If you refuse, I will have no choice but to place you under detention for refusing to comply with a security officer's lawful orders." Amara looked at the 3 officers standing in front of her. She saw Derek's stubborn certainty, James's growing discomfort, and Patricia's uncertainty. She knew that if she resisted, if she raised her voice or showed anger, it would only make things worse. Derek had already decided she was a threat. Anything she did now would be used to justify his actions. "I will come with you," Amara said clearly. "But I want it noted that I am complying under protest. I am doing so to avoid this situation escalating further. And I am telling you now that this incident will be formally reported to courthouse administration, and that there will be consequences for what is happening here." Derek nodded, satisfied that she was finally cooperating. "James, Patricia, escort her to the holding area near the main entrance. I'll contact the captain and begin the verification process." The 2 officers stepped forward, James looked apologetic. Patricia avoided making eye contact. They positioned themselves on either side of Amara, not touching her but making it clear they were escorting her. Amara picked up her coffee cup from the bench where she had set it down. The coffee was probably cold by now. She adjusted her grip on her briefcase and began walking back toward the elevator. The two officers walked with her. Derek followed a few steps behind. As they passed the small group of onlookers in the hallway, Amara recognized one of the lawyers. Michael Torres was a public defender who had appeared in her courtroom several times. His eyes widened when he saw her being escorted by security officers. He started to step forward, his mouth opening to speak, but Amara gave a small shake of her head. She didn't want anyone else getting involved and making the situation more complicated. The elevator ride down to the main floor was silent. Amara stood straight, her chin up, refusing to look ashamed or guilty. She had done nothing wrong. She had committed no crime. She was being detained because a security officer had looked at her and decided she didn't belong. When they reached the main lobby, Derek directed them to a small room near the security checkpoint. It was a holding area used for people who set off the metal detectors or needed additional screening. The room had white walls, a metal table, and 3 chairs. There was one small window that looked out onto the lobby. "You can wait here while we verify your identity," Derek said, gesturing to one of the chairs. Amara walked into the room and sat down. She placed her briefcase on the table in front of her. She set her coffee cup beside it. Then she looked directly at Derek Mason. "How long do you think this verification process will take?" she asked. Derek shrugged. "As long as it takes. We need to be thorough. My courtroom opens in less than 2 hours," Amara said. "I have a high-profile case scheduled first on my docket. Lawyers, defendants, witnesses, and members of the media will be arriving soon. When I am not in my courtroom at 9 o'clock, people will ask questions. My clerk will look for me. The court administrator will be notified. And you will have to explain why you detained the presiding judge in a holding room, rather than simply looking at her identification." Derek's jaw tightened. "If you are who you say you are, this will all be cleared up quickly." "Then make it quick," Amara replied. "Look at my judicial ID, it's in my left jacket pocket. Or call the court administrator's office. His number is in the courthouse directory, or walk to my chambers and look at the nameplate on the door. Any of these actions would take less than 5 minutes. Derek turned to James and Patricia, who were standing in the doorway. "Stay here and make sure she doesn't leave. I'm going to contact Captain Harris." He walked away, leaving the 2 officers to guard the door. Amara sat in the chair, her hands folded on the table. Through the window, she could see the lobby filling up with more people as the morning progressed. Lawyers in suits hurried past. Defendants checked in at the information desk. Court staff walked by with folders and tablets. And somewhere in that busy courthouse, her courtroom sat empty, waiting for a judge who had been stopped at her own door. 20 minutes passed. Amara sat in the holding room watching the clock on the wall tick forward. Each minute felt longer than the last. She could see people moving through the lobby outside the window. Some glanced at the holding room curiously, wondering who was inside. Others walked past without noticing. James Chen stood at the door, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He looked increasingly uncomfortable. Patricia Miller had stepped away a few minutes earlier, saying she needed to check on something. Amara suspected she wanted to distance herself from the situation. "Officer Chen," Amara said quietly, "you look like you have doubts about this." James glanced at her, then looked away. "It's not my place to question Officer Mason's decisions. He's been doing this job longer than I have." "Experience doesn't mean someone is always right," Amara replied. "You have eyes, you have judgment. What does your instinct tell you about this situation?" James was quiet for a moment. "I think I've seen you before," he admitted. "In the courthouse, but I can't remember where exactly." "I've been presiding over courtroom 4C for 6 months, Amara said. "You've probably seen me in the hallways or in the cafeteria. Before that, I practiced law in this building for 15 years. I argued cases in these courtrooms. I know this building as well as anyone." "Then why didn't you just show Officer Mason your ID when he first asked?" James questioned. Amara's expression hardened slightly. "I tried to. He told me to keep my hands where he could see them. He called for backup before I could show him anything. And now I've been sitting in this room for 20 minutes while he supposedly verifies my identity, a process that should have taken 30 seconds. The door opened and Patricia returned. She looked troubled. She stepped close to James and whispered something Amara couldn't hear. James's eyes widened slightly, and he glanced at Amara with a new expression on his face. "What is it?" Amara asked. Patricia hesitated, then spoke. "I just saw Michael Torres in the hallway. He's a public defender. He asked me what was going on. When I told him we were verifying someone's identity, he said that woman is Judge Williams and that she's presided over several of his cases." James's face paled. He looked at Amara with growing alarm. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" he asked Patricia urgently. "I just found out," Patricia said defensively. "I saw Torres and asked if he knew anything. He seemed really concerned." Amara stood up from her chair. "So now you believe me? Because another person confirmed my identity? My word wasn't enough?" James opened his mouth to respond, but the door opened again. Derek Mason walked in, followed by a tall woman in a supervisor's uniform. This was Captain Linda Harris, the head of courthouse security. She looked at Amara, then at her two officers, then back at Amara. Her expression was difficult to read. "Ma'am," Captain Harris said formally. "I'm Captain Harris. I supervise security for this courthouse. Officer Mason has informed me of the situation. I need to ask you some questions." Amara crossed her arms. "Before you ask me anything, I want to know if Officer Mason has made any attempt to verify my identity. Has he looked at my judicial ID card? Has he called the court administrator? Has he checked with my clerk? Has he done anything besides keep me detained in this room?" Captain Harris glanced at Derek, who stood stiffly near the door. Officer Mason wanted to wait for my arrival before proceeding with verification. He felt the situation required supervision from a higher authority. "The situation required a 30-second phone call," Amara said, her voice sharp now. "Or a 10-second glance at my identification card. Instead, I have been detained for over 20 minutes. My courtroom opens in less than 90 minutes. I have cases scheduled. I have people expecting me to be on the bench, and I have been held here because your officer decided I didn't look like a judge." "Ma'am, we have protocols," Captain Harris began. "I know your protocols," Amara interrupted. "I helped review them when I was appointed to the bench. Those protocols say that when someone presents judicial identification, you verify it and allow them access. Those protocols do not say that you detain a judge in a holding room because you don't believe they are who they say they are, not without making any actual attempt to verify their identity." Captain Harris's expression shifted. She was starting to understand that something had gone very wrong here. "May I see your identification?" she asked carefully. Amara reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her judicial ID card. It was an official credential with her photo, name, title, and the district court seal. She held it out to Captain Harris. The captain took the ID and examined it closely. Her face went pale. She looked at the photo, then at Amara, then back at the photo. She turned to Derek Mason, and Amara could see anger flashing in her eyes. "Derek," Captain Harris said quietly, "step outside with me. Now." Derek's confident expression was starting to crack. He had expected the captain to support his actions, to praise him for being vigilant. Instead, she looked furious. He followed her out of the room, leaving James and Patricia with Amara. Through the window, Amara could see Captain Harris speaking to Derek in the lobby. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see the captain's animated gestures and Derek's increasingly defensive posture. Other security officers were starting to notice the confrontation. Court staff walked by, staring. Inside the holding room, Patricia spoke hesitantly. "Judge Williams, I'm sorry. If I had known." "If you had known." "What?" Amara asked, turning to face her. "You would have treated me differently? You would have questioned Officer Mason's judgment? You would have done what you should have done from the beginning, which is verify before detaining?" Patricia looked down at her feet. "Yes," she said quietly. James cleared his throat. For what it's worth, Judge Williams, I had a feeling something was off. I should have spoken up more strongly. Yes, you should have, Amara agreed. You're security officers. Your job is to protect everyone in this courthouse, including the people who work here. That means protecting them from actual threats, not from your colleagues' biased assumptions. The door opened again. Captain Harris walked back in, her face set in hard lines. Derek followed behind her, and for the first time he looked uncertain. He wouldn't meet Amara's eyes. Judge Williams, Captain Harris said formally, on behalf of the Courthouse Security Department, I apologize for this incident. You should never have been detained. Officer Mason's actions were not in accordance with our protocols or our standards. You are free to go, of course. Is there anything we can do to assist you? Amara picked up her briefcase. What you can do is explain to me exactly why this happened. Officer Mason, look at me. Derek slowly raised his eyes to meet hers. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world. Tell me, Amara said, her voice calm but firm. Why did you refuse to look at my identification? Derek struggled to find words. I thought you were lying. I thought anyone could claim to be a judge. So you didn't believe me when I told you who I was. You didn't believe me when I explained where my chambers were. You didn't believe me when I told you my clerk's name. Why not? Derek was silent. He knew the answer, but he couldn't say it out loud. He couldn't admit that he had looked at this woman in her business casual clothes walking through the main entrance early in the morning and decided she couldn't possibly be a judge. He couldn't admit that his mental image of what a judge looked like didn't include someone who looked like her. You made assumptions, Amara said. You looked at me and decided I didn't belong in a position of authority. You decided I was lying before I said a single word, and because of those assumptions, you detained an officer of the court. You kept me from performing my duties. You humiliated me in front of my colleagues. And you wasted everyone's time because you refused to do the one simple thing that would have resolved this instantly. Look at someone's credentials when they offer to show them to you. The room was silent. Captain Harris looked angry and embarrassed. Patricia stared at the floor. James looked sick. Derek stood frozen, the weight of his mistake crushing down on him. Amara walked to the door. I'm going to my courtroom now. But this conversation is not over. I will be filing a formal complaint. I will be meeting with the presiding judge and the court administrator. And I will be asking some very hard questions about how security officers in this courthouse are trained, supervised, and held accountable. She walked out of the holding room into the busy lobby. People stopped and stared as she passed. Word had spread through the courthouse that something unusual was happening. Lawyers whispered to each other. Court staff pulled out their phones. Michael Torres, the public defender, approached her with concern on his face. Judge Williams, are you all right? I saw what was happening earlier. I wasn't sure if I should intervene. Amara gave him a tired smile. I'm fine, Michael. Thank you for your concern. I need to get to my courtroom now. She walked toward the elevator, her head high, her briefcase in hand. She pressed the button and waited. When the doors opened, she stepped inside and turned around. Through the elevator doors, she could see Captain Harris talking urgently with her security officers. She could see Derek Mason standing apart from the others. His shoulders slumped, his confidence shattered. The elevator doors closed, and Amara allowed herself to take a deep breath. Her hands were shaking slightly. Sarah Mitchell rushed through the courthouse main entrance at 8:15, later than she had planned to arrive. As Judge Williams's clerk, she usually got to the courtroom by 7:30 to prepare for the day's cases. But her car had trouble starting that morning, and everything had been delayed. She hurried through security, barely noticing the tense atmosphere among the security officers. Sarah was an organized woman in her early 30s who had worked as a court clerk for 7 years. She had been assigned to Judge Williams when Amara first took the bench 6 months ago, and she had quickly developed great respect for the new judge. Judge Williams was fair, hardworking, and always prepared. She treated everyone in the courtroom with dignity, from high-powered lawyers to nervous first-time defendants. As Sarah rode the elevator to the 4th floor, she checked her phone. No messages from Judge Williams. That was normal. The judge usually arrived early and went straight to her chambers to review case files. Sarah expected to find her there now, probably already in her robes, making notes for the morning's hearings. But when Sarah opened the chamber's door, the room was empty. The lights were off. Judge Williams's robes hung on the back of the door, untouched. Sarah frowned. This was unusual. Judge Williams was never late. She was the most punctual person Sarah knew. Sarah turned on the lights and set down her bag. She checked the small bathroom attached to the chambers. Empty. She walked out into the courtroom itself. Also empty. The clock on the wall showed 8:20. Court would begin in 40 minutes. Sarah pulled out her phone and called Judge Williams. The call went straight to voicemail. That was strange. The judge always answered her phone, or at least called back within minutes. Sarah left a message. Judge Williams, this is Sarah. I'm at the courthouse and I don't see you in chambers. Just checking if everything is okay. Please call me back. She walked back into the hallway, thinking maybe the judge had stopped to talk with another judge or had gone to the courthouse cafeteria. The hallway was quiet except for a few lawyers setting up in other courtrooms. Sarah checked her watch again. 8:25. Maria Rodriguez, the bailiff for Courtroom 4C, arrived a few minutes later. Maria was a stocky woman in her 50s with short gray hair and sharp eyes. She had worked at the courthouse for 20 years and had seen everything. She walked into the courtroom and found Sarah standing by the judge's bench looking worried. "Morning, Sarah," Maria said. "Where's Judge Williams?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "She's not in chambers. I called her phone but got voicemail." "Have you seen her this morning?" Maria shook her head. "No, but that's odd. She's always here early." "Did she mention having a meeting or anything?" "No. Her calendar was clear until court starts at 9. Maria pulled out her own phone and tried calling the judge. No answer. She left a message and hung up. This isn't like her. Something must have happened. "Family emergency, maybe?" "She would have called one of us," Sarah said. "She wouldn't just not show up." The two women looked at each other with growing concern. In the 6 months Judge Williams had been on the bench, she had never been late, never missed a day, never failed to communicate if something came up. The fact that she wasn't here, wasn't answering her phone, and hadn't sent any message was completely out of character. "I'm going to call the court administrator's office," Maria decided. Maybe they know something. Before Maria could make the call, a young lawyer named David Park poked his head into the courtroom. "Excuse me, is Judge Williams here? I have a case scheduled for 9 o'clock. "The judge is running a bit late," Maria said smoothly, not wanting to alarm anyone. "Court will begin on time." But inside, Maria was not confident about that statement. She walked to the back of the courtroom and dialed the court administrator's office. A secretary answered. "Hi, this is Maria Rodriguez, bailiff for Courtroom 4C. Is Michael Chen available? I need to speak with him about Judge Williams. He's in a meeting right now. Can I take a message? It's important. Judge Williams hasn't arrived for court and we can't reach her. This is very unusual." There was a pause. "Hold on, let me see if I can interrupt him." Maria waited, tapping her foot anxiously. She could see more lawyers and defendants starting to arrive in the hallway outside the courtroom. The clock showed 8:35. Sarah joined her at the back of the courtroom. "Anything?" Sarah asked, waiting for the administrator. Michael Chen came on the line. "Maria, what's going on with Judge Williams?" "That's what I'm trying to find out. She's not in chambers, she's not answering her phone, and no one has seen her this morning. We have a full docket starting in 25 minutes, including the Morrison fraud case that's been all over the news." Michael was silent for a moment. "That's very strange. Judge Williams has never been late or failed to notify someone if she couldn't make it. Have you checked with security to see if she signed in this morning?" "No, I haven't, but that's a good idea. Let me make some calls. I'll get back to you in a few minutes. In the meantime, prepare to delay the morning session if necessary. I may need to find a replacement judge to cover if something serious has happened." Maria hung up and turned to Sarah. "The administrator is going to check with security and make some calls. We need to be ready to delay the morning session." Sarah bit her lip. "The Morrison case is high profile. The media is going to be here. If we have to delay or get a substitute judge, it's going to raise a lot of questions." "I know," Maria said, "but we can't start court without a judge." A court clerk named Thomas walked past the courtroom and Maria called out to him. "Thomas, have you seen Judge Williams this morning?" Thomas stopped and thought. "Actually, now that you mention it, I saw something weird earlier. Around 7 o'clock, I think. I was down in the main lobby getting coffee and I saw security officers escorting someone. It looked like they were taking whoever it was to the holding area. Maria's stomach dropped. Did you see who it was? Not clearly. It was a woman in a dark suit. I didn't think much of it at the time. Security stops people sometimes for various reasons. What time was this? Maybe 7:15? I didn't really check. After Thomas walked away, Maria and Sarah looked at each other with alarm. A woman in a dark suit, Sarah repeated. Judge Williams wears dark suits. But why would security detain the judge? Maria said. That doesn't make sense. Unless they didn't know who she was, Sarah said slowly. The judge's entrance has been closed. She's been coming through the main entrance like everyone else. What if a security officer didn't recognize her? That's a serious accusation, Maria warned. We can't just assume, then let's go find out, Sarah interrupted. Court starts in 20 minutes. We need to know where the judge is. The two women hurried out of the courtroom and toward the elevator. Several lawyers watched them go, sensing something was wrong. In the elevator, Maria pressed the button for the ground floor. If security did detain Judge Williams by mistake, Sarah said quietly, this is going to be a huge problem. That's an understatement, Maria replied grimly. The elevator doors opened onto the main lobby. It was busy now with people arriving for various court proceedings. Maria and Sarah walked quickly toward the security checkpoint. Officer James Chen was standing near the metal detector. When he saw Maria approaching, his expression changed. He looked uncomfortable and guilty. Maria had worked with James for several years. She knew him to be a decent officer, usually friendly and professional. But right now he looked like he wanted to disappear. That told Maria everything she needed to know. James, Maria said firmly, walking right up to him. Where is Judge Williams? James looked down. You should talk to Captain Harris. I'm talking to you. Where is Judge Amara Williams, the presiding judge for Courtroom 4C? Other security officers nearby stopped what they were doing. The lobby seemed to grow quieter. People sensed tension and turned to watch. James took a deep breath. There was an incident this morning. Officer Mason detained someone he believed was impersonating a court official. Captain Harris is handling it, Sarah gasped. Someone. You detained Judge Williams? We didn't know, James said defensively. She came through the main entrance, and Officer Mason thought, where is she now? Maria demanded, her voice rising. Court starts in 15 minutes. We have a full docket. We have media arriving. Where is the judge? I believe she went to her chambers, James said. Captain Harris released her about 30 minutes ago. Maria pulled out her phone and called Judge Williams again. This time the judge answered, Maria? Judge Williams, thank goodness. Are you all right? We've been looking everywhere for you. There was a pause. I'm in my chambers. I'm fine. Court will begin on time. What happened this morning? We heard security detained you? Another pause. We'll discuss it later. Right now I need to prepare for the Morrison case. I'll see you in a few minutes. The judge hung up. Maria lowered her phone and looked at James. The officer couldn't meet her eyes. Do you have any idea what you've done? Maria asked quietly. Do you understand the magnitude of this mistake? James nodded miserably. Officer Mason is meeting with Captain Harris and the presiding judge right now. This is going to be reviewed formally. Sarah was shaking her head in disbelief. How could you not know who Judge Williams was? She's been here for 6 months. She walks through this lobby every day. The judges usually come through the side entrance, James said weakly, which has been closed for 2 weeks. Sarah shot back. Every judge has been using the main entrance, including Judge Williams, who is a sitting judge in this courthouse. How could Officer Mason possibly think it was appropriate to detain her without even attempting to verify her identity? James had no answer. Maria and Sarah didn't wait for one. They turned and walked back toward the elevator. As they rode back up to the 4th floor, Maria was quiet. Sarah could see she was processing what had just happened, and she was angry. This is going to be a major incident, Maria finally said. A sitting judge detained by courthouse security. The presiding judge will have to investigate. There will be formal complaints. The media might get wind of it, especially with the Morrison case today. Judge Williams has every right to file complaints, Sarah said. What happened to her was wrong. It was humiliating. And honestly, I think we both know why it happened. Maria nodded grimly. She knew exactly why it had happened. She had worked in this courthouse long enough to see patterns. She had seen how people treated lawyers of color differently, assuming they were defendants. She had seen how people questioned whether women belonged in positions of authority. but she had never imagined it would happen to a judge in her own courthouse. When they got back to courtroom 4C, the gallery was starting to fill. Lawyers for both sides of the Morrison case had arrived. Media representatives sat in the back row with notebooks and recording devices. Everyone was waiting for court to begin. At exactly 9 o'clock, the door to the judge's chambers opened. Judge Amara Williams stepped out wearing her black robes, her head held high. Her face was calm and composed, showing no sign of the ordeal she had been through that morning. She walked to the bench and sat down. Maria stood and called out in her clear, strong voice, "All rise. The district court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Amara Williams presiding." Everyone in the courtroom stood. Judge Williams looked out at the assembled crowd, at the lawyers, the defendants, the media, the court staff. Then she spoke. "Please be seated. We have a full docket today, beginning with the case of the People versus Morrison. Are both sides ready to proceed?" Judge Williams sat at the bench and listened to the opening statements in the Morrison fraud case. She took notes, asked clarifying questions, and managed the courtroom with her usual calm authority. To anyone watching, she appeared completely focused on the case before her. But inside, her mind kept returning to the morning's incident. She had been detained, in her own courthouse, at the door to her own courtroom, by a security officer who had refused to believe her identity, despite every opportunity to verify it. The humiliation of it burned in her chest, but she pushed the feeling aside. Right now, she had a job to do. The people in this courtroom deserved a judge who gave them her full attention. The morning session lasted until noon. When Judge Williams called for a lunch recess, the lawyers gathered their materials and left. The media representatives hurried out to file their reports. The gallery emptied. Maria approached the bench. "Judge," the court administrator called during the break. "Michael Chen wants to see you in his office as soon as you're available." Judge Williams nodded. She had expected this. "Tell him I'll be there in 15 minutes. She went back to her chambers and removed her robes. She sat at her desk for a moment, allowing herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. Then she straightened her shoulders, picked up a folder, and walked out. Michael Chen's office was on the 3rd floor. He was a serious man in his 50s who had managed the courthouse operations for over a decade. When his assistant showed Judge Williams in, Michael stood up immediately. "Judge Williams, please sit down. Can I get you anything? Water, coffee?" "I'm fine, thank you." Michael sat back down and folded his hands on his desk. "I heard what happened this morning. Captain Harris briefed me on the situation. I want to start by offering my sincere apology. What occurred should never have happened." "No, it shouldn't have," Judge Williams agreed calmly. "A security officer detained a sitting judge without making any attempt to verify her identity. He refused to look at my judicial identification when I offered to show it. He refused to call your office or my clerk. He held me in a security holding room for over 20 minutes based purely on his assumption that I couldn't possibly be who I said I was." Michael looked pained. "Captain Harris has already begun a formal investigation. Officer Mason has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. The other 2 officers involved have been interviewed. We're taking this very seriously." "I should hope so," Judge Williams said. "But I need more than an investigation into one officer. I need to understand how this could happen at all. What training do your security officers receive about identifying courthouse personnel? What protocols exist for situations where someone's identity needs to be verified? And most importantly, what measures are in place to prevent unconscious bias from affecting how officers treat people?" Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Our security officers receive standard training in courthouse procedures, threat assessment, and conflict de-escalation. They're taught to check identification and verify credentials for anyone they don't recognize. Officer Mason didn't verify my credentials," Judge Williams pointed out. "He assumed I was lying. He called for backup. He detained me, all without taking a single step to confirm or deny my identity. Why do you think that happened?" The question hung in the air. Michael knew the answer, but he was reluctant to say it out loud. Finally, he spoke carefully. "I believe Officer Mason made assumptions based on appearance rather than following proper procedure. Let's be clear about what we're discussing," Judge Williams said firmly. "Officer Mason looked at me, a black woman in business casual clothes, and decided I couldn't be a judge. He made that decision in seconds before I said a word. And once he made that decision, nothing I said or did could change his mind. That's not just a failure of protocol, that's prejudice. Michael nodded slowly. You're right, and I'm deeply troubled by it. This courthouse should be a place where everyone, regardless of their race or background, is treated with respect and fairness. Should be, Judge Williams emphasized, but this morning showed me that we have work to do. I'm not the first person of color to be treated with suspicion in this building. I've heard stories from lawyers, defendants, and even other court staff about being followed by security, questioned more aggressively, or assumed to be in the wrong place. But when it happens to a judge, it exposes a much larger problem. What would you like to see happen? Michael asked. Judge Williams opened her folder and pulled out several pages of notes. She had spent her lunch break writing, "First, I want a complete review of security training protocols with a focus on implicit bias. Second, I want mandatory bias awareness training for all courthouse security personnel and regular refresher courses. Third, I want clear procedures for identity verification that don't rely on subjective judgment about who looks like they belong somewhere." She continued. "Fourth, I want an anonymous reporting system where people can report instances of bias or discrimination without fear of retaliation. Fifth, I want regular meetings between courthouse leadership and staff to discuss diversity and inclusion issues. And sixth, I want this incident documented and used as a case study in why these measures are necessary." Michael wrote quickly, taking notes. "These are all reasonable requests. I'll present them to the presiding judge and the courthouse board. We can begin implementing some of them immediately. I also intend to file a formal complaint against Officer Mason," Judge Williams added, "not because I want to end his career, but because there need to be consequences when someone abuses their authority and treats others with prejudice. If there are no consequences, nothing changes." "I understand," Michael said. "The investigation will be thorough and fair. Officer Mason will have the opportunity to respond to the complaint. But I want you to know that what happened this morning is not reflective of the values we try to uphold in this courthouse." Judge Williams stood up. "Then let's make sure our actions reflect those values. Words aren't enough. We need real change." She left Michael's office and walked back toward the elevator. As she passed through the hallways, she noticed people watching her. Word had spread through the courthouse about what had happened. Some people looked sympathetic. Others looked curious. A few looked uncomfortable, as if they didn't know what to say. Thomas, the court clerk who had seen her being escorted that morning, stopped her in the hallway. "Judge Williams, I heard what happened." "I'm so sorry. If I had realized it was you, I would have said something." "It's not your fault, Thomas. But thank you." "For what it's worth," Thomas continued, "a lot of people are talking about this, and most of them are angry on your behalf. They think it was wrong. They want something to change." Judge Williams gave him a small smile. "Change doesn't happen just because people are angry. Change happens when people take action. But I appreciate you telling me that. That I was following my training. That anyone in my position would have done the same thing. But that wasn't true. I wasn't following my training. I was following my prejudices. I looked at you and decided in an instant that you couldn't be a judge. I didn't base that decision on any facts or evidence. I based it on what I thought a judge should look like. And what I thought a judge should look like was not someone like you. I realize now that this is racism. I didn't think of myself as a racist person. I have friends and colleagues of different races. I thought I treated everyone fairly. But when I look honestly at my actions that morning, I can't deny what they were. I profiled you. I treated you as a threat based on your race. I refused to listen when you told me who you were. I refused to look at the evidence right in front of me. I humiliated you in your own workplace. I'm ashamed of what I did. I'm ashamed that it took losing my job and going through training for me to see what I'd been doing. I'm ashamed that I hurt someone who deserved respect and dignity. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't think I deserve forgiveness. But I want you to know that I'm working every day to be better. I'm examining my assumptions about people. I'm questioning my instincts. I'm trying to see my own biases before they hurt someone else. What I did to you can never be undone. But maybe I can make sure it never happens again. Not by me and not by other officers I work with. Respectfully, Derek Mason. Judge Williams read the letter twice. Then she set it down and sat quietly for a long time. The letter didn't erase what had happened. It didn't take away the humiliation or the anger she had felt. But it suggested that perhaps Derek Mason was beginning to understand. And understanding was the first step toward real change. 2 months after the incident, Judge Williams was invited to speak at the state judicial conference. Judges from across the state gathered to hear her address on diversity, bias, and justice. She stood at the podium and looked out at the audience. She saw judges of different ages, races, and backgrounds. Some looked engaged and curious. Others looked skeptical or uncomfortable. She began to speak. On October 15th, I was detained by a security officer in my own courthouse. He refused to believe I was a judge despite multiple opportunities to verify my identity. This incident was humiliating, frustrating, and wrong, but it was also a learning opportunity, not just for that officer or that courthouse, but for all of us in the justice system. She continued, "We like to think that courthouses are places where everyone is treated equally under the law. We like to believe that justice is blind. But justice is administered by people, and people have biases. Some of those biases are conscious. Many are unconscious. But whether we're aware of them or not, they affect how we see people, how we treat them, and how we make decisions about them." Judge Williams shared statistics about disparities in how people of different races were treated in the court system. She talked about studies showing that judges, lawyers, and court staff all exhibited unconscious biases that affected their work. She described the changes her courthouse had implemented and the positive responses they had seen. "Change is uncomfortable," she said. "Examining our own biases is difficult. Admitting that we might treat people differently based on their race, gender, or appearance is hard. But it's necessary, because every person who walks into a courthouse deserves to be treated with dignity and fairness. That's what justice requires." The speech was met with a standing ovation. Afterward, several judges approached her to discuss implementing similar reforms in their own courthouses. Some shared their own experiences with bias, either as targets or as people who recognized their own prejudiced assumptions. The conversation continued long after the formal session ended. That evening, Judge Williams returned home feeling hopeful. Real change was slow and difficult, but it was happening. Her experience had opened doors for important conversations. It had forced people to examine systems and practices that had gone unquestioned for too long. A few days later, she received a call from Captain Harris. "Judge Williams, I wanted to update you on Officer Mason. He's completed his suspension and his training. He's asked to meet with you before he returns to work. Again, you're under no obligation to meet with him." Judge Williams thought about it. "I'll meet with him, but not alone. I want you present, and I want Michael Chen there as well." The meeting was scheduled for the following week. When Derek Mason walked into the conference room, he looked different than he had 3 months ago. The confidence and certainty were gone. He looked nervous and humble. He sat down across from Judge Williams, and for a moment no one spoke. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Derek finally said. "I know I don't deserve your time." "You're right, you don't," Judge Williams replied. "But I'm here because I want to understand if you've genuinely learned from what happened." Derek nodded slowly. "I have. The training opened my eyes to things I didn't want to see about myself. I thought I was a good officer who treated everyone fairly. But when I really examined my actions over the years, I saw a pattern. I treated people differently based on how they looked. I followed some people more than others. I questioned some people more aggressively than others. And I justified it all by telling myself I was just being careful or following my instincts." "And now?" Judge Williams asked. "Now I understand that my instincts were shaped by prejudice. I made assumptions about people based on race, and those assumptions affected how I did my job. What I did to you was the worst example, but it wasn't the only one. I'm ashamed of that." Judge Williams studied him carefully. She had seen many people apologize over the years. Some apologies were genuine. Others were just words meant to avoid consequences. She wanted to determine which category this fell into. "Shame is a starting point," she said. "But what matters is what you do with it. Will you go back to work and slip back into old patterns, or will you actively work every day to be different?" "I want to be different," Derek said. "I want to be the kind of officer who protects everyone equally. I want to check my assumptions and question my instincts. I want to treat every person who walks through that courthouse door with respect and dignity, regardless of what they look like." "That's what I want too," Judge Williams said. "And I want you to understand that I'll be watching. If I hear of another incident, another case where you profile someone or treat them with prejudice, I will push for your permanent removal. I'm giving you a chance to do better, but it's only one chance." "I understand," Derek said quietly. "And thank you. I don't deserve a second chance, but I promise I won't waste it." After the meeting, Michael Chen walked Judge Williams back to her chambers. "Do you think he meant it?" Michael asked. "I think he's beginning to mean it," Judge Williams replied. "Real change takes time. He's had 3 months of training and reflection. Now he needs years of putting that training into practice. Some days he'll succeed, some days he'll struggle. But at least now he's aware of the problem. That's more than he had before." 6 months after the incident, the changes in the courthouse were visible. Security officers wore badges that said, "Ask me about bias awareness." New signs throughout the building reminded everyone that discrimination would not be tolerated. The anonymous reporting system had received dozens of reports, leading to additional training and policy changes. Judge Williams continued her work on the bench, presiding over cases with fairness and wisdom. But she also became an advocate for reform, speaking at conferences, consulting with other courthouses, and pushing for systemic change throughout the justice system. Derek Mason returned to work as a security officer. He was quieter than before, less certain, more thoughtful. He checked credentials carefully and treated everyone with respect. When new officers joined the security team, he was asked to share his story as part of their training. It was uncomfortable to admit his mistakes publicly, but he did it because he understood it was important. One morning, almost a year after the incident, Judge Williams arrived at the courthouse through the main entrance. The judge's entrance had long since been repaired, but she occasionally chose to use the public entrance anyway. As she walked through security, she saw Derek Mason at his post. Their eyes met briefly. Derek gave a respectful nod. Judge Williams nodded back. No words were spoken, but there was an understanding between them. What had happened could not be undone, but both of them were working to ensure it led to something better. As Judge Williams walked toward the elevator, she noticed a young black lawyer arriving for his first court appearance. He looked nervous, clutching his briefcase tightly. He went through the metal detector, and Derek checked his credentials carefully and professionally, then gave him directions to the courtroom with a warm smile. Judge Williams smiled too. That young lawyer would never know how differently things might have gone a year ago. He would never know about the incident that had sparked so much change, but he benefited from it nonetheless. He walked through that courthouse door and was treated with dignity and respect, exactly as everyone should be. And that, Judge Williams thought as she stepped into the elevator, was what justice looked like. Not perfect, not complete, but always striving to be better than it was yesterday. Always learning from mistakes and working to ensure those mistakes led to positive change. Always remembering that behind every policy, every procedure, every decision, there were real people who deserved to be treated as equals. The elevator doors closed, and Judge Williams headed to her courtroom to begin another day of work in service of justice. Back in her chambers, Judge Williams found a message from the presiding judge, Judge Harold Sherman. He wanted to meet with her tomorrow morning before court. She called his office and confirmed the appointment. Sarah knocked on the door and came in. "Judge, how are you holding up?" "I'm all right, Sarah. It's been a difficult day." "I'm so angry about what happened," Sarah said. "When Maria and I found out that security had detained you, I couldn't believe it. How dare they treat you that way?" "Their training failed them," Judge Williams said. "Or perhaps their training was inadequate from the start. Either way, we need to address it systematically." "What can I do to help?" Sarah asked. "Keep doing your job excellently, just like you always do. And if you see or hear about anyone in this courthouse being treated with bias or disrespect, speak up. That's what we all need to do. We need to create a culture where prejudice and discrimination aren't tolerated." At 3 o'clock, Judge Williams resumed the afternoon session of the Morrison case. She presided with the same professionalism she had shown all day. When court adjourned at 5, she returned to her chambers and finally allowed herself to sit quietly for a few minutes. Maria knocked and entered. "Judge, I wanted to check on you before I left for the day." "Thank you, Maria. I appreciate all your support today." "You handled everything with such grace," Maria said. "I don't know if I could have done the same. If I had been detained like that, I would have been furious." "Oh, I was furious," Judge Williams admitted. "I still am. But showing that fury wouldn't have helped the situation this morning. And it wouldn't have helped me do my job today. Sometimes the best way to fight prejudice is to refuse to let it change who you are or how you do your work." Maria nodded. "Still, you shouldn't have had to go through that. None of us should. No, we shouldn't, but it happened. And now we have a choice. We can let it be just another incident that gets swept under the rug, or we can use it to make real changes. I'm choosing the latter. After Maria left, Judge Williams gathered her things and prepared to leave for the day. As she walked through the courthouse toward the parking lot, she used the main entrance again. The same entrance where she had been stopped that morning. Derek Mason was not there. He was on administrative leave, but Captain Harris was present, overseeing the evening shift change. When she saw Judge Williams, she approached quickly. "Judge Williams, may I speak with you for a moment?" "Yes, Captain." They stepped to the side of the lobby, away from the flow of people. Captain Harris looked tired and troubled. "I want you to know that I've been reviewing security procedures all day. I've also been talking with my officers about what happened this morning. Several of them have admitted they've made similar assumptions about people in the past, though never to the point of detainment. This incident has been a wake-up call for the entire department." "That's good to hear," Judge Williams said. "But awareness is just the first step." "I know. I've already begun drafting new training protocols, and I'd like your input if you're willing to provide it. You have a perspective that we need to hear." Judge Williams considered this. "I'll review whatever you draft. But I also think you should consult with other people of color who work in or visit this courthouse. Get a range of perspectives. This isn't just about one incident with one judge." "I will," Captain Harris promised. "And Judge Williams, I'm truly sorry. As the head of security, the failure this morning was ultimately my failure. I didn't train my officers well enough. I didn't create an environment where they questioned their own biases. That's on me, and I take full responsibility." Judge Williams nodded. "I appreciate you saying that. Real leadership means accepting responsibility when things go wrong. Now the question is what you do next." She walked out of the courthouse into the evening air. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Judge Williams got into her car and sat for a moment before starting the engine. She thought about the day she had just lived through, the humiliation of being detained, the anger she had controlled, the professionalism she had maintained, the changes she was determined to make. Tomorrow she would meet with the presiding judge. Tomorrow she would begin the formal process of filing her complaint. Tomorrow she would start working on the reforms she had outlined. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel everything she had been holding back all day: the hurt, the frustration, the exhaustion, and underneath it all, the determination to ensure that what happened to her would lead to something better for everyone who walked through those courthouse doors. 3 weeks had passed since the incident. Judge Williams sat in a conference room with Judge Harold Sherman, the presiding judge Michael Chen, the court administrator, and representatives from the State Judicial Board. On the table in front of them sat a thick report detailing the investigation into Officer Derek Mason's actions and the broader issues it had revealed about courthouse security practices. Judge Sherman, a white-haired man in his 60s, opened the meeting. "We've completed our review of the incident on October 15th. Judge Williams, I want to begin by offering you a formal apology on behalf of this court. What happened to you was unacceptable and should never have occurred." "Thank you," Judge Williams replied. "But I'm more interested in what comes next than in apologies." "As you should be," Judge Sherman agreed. He opened the report. "Officer Derek Mason has been suspended without pay for 60 days. He will be required to complete extensive bias awareness training before returning to duty. He will also be on probation for 1 year, during which any similar incident will result in immediate termination." Judge Williams listened carefully. "And what about the systemic changes?" Michael Chen spoke up. "We've implemented several of the reforms you recommended. All courthouse security personnel are now required to complete implicit bias training. We've brought in outside experts to conduct these sessions, and the feedback has been positive, though some officers are resistant to the idea that they have biases." "Resistance is expected," Judge Williams said. "People don't like to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves, but that's exactly why the training is necessary. We've also revised our identity verification procedures," Captain Harris added. She was present as the head of security. "Officers are now required to check credentials first and ask questions second. We've created clear escalation protocols that emphasize verification over assumption." "What about the reporting system for bias incidents?" Judge Williams asked. "We've established an anonymous hotline and an online form," Michael explained. It's available to everyone who enters the courthouse, staff and visitors alike. Reports go directly to an independent review board that includes members from outside the courthouse. Judge Sherman leaned forward. Judge Williams, your experience, painful as it was, has sparked conversations throughout the entire state court system. Other courthouses are looking at their own practices. The State Judicial Board is developing statewide standards for security training, with a focus on preventing bias and discrimination. That's encouraging, Judge Williams acknowledged, but I want to return to Officer Mason for a moment. Has he shown any genuine understanding of what he did wrong? There was a brief silence. Captain Harris finally spoke. Officer Mason has been struggling. He completed the required training, but his instructors noted that he seemed defensive at first. He kept insisting he was just following his instincts and doing his job. His instincts were wrong, Judge Williams said firmly. His instincts told him that a black woman couldn't be a judge. His instincts led him to ignore every piece of evidence that contradicted his assumptions. If he doesn't understand that, then he hasn't learned anything. Toward the end of the training, Captain Harris continued, something seemed to shift. The instructor had him write a detailed account of the incident from your perspective, walking through what it must have felt like to be stopped, questioned, disbelieved, and detained. That exercise appeared to affect him deeply. Has he asked to speak with me? Judge Williams asked. He's written a letter, Judge Sherman said. He pulled an envelope from the folder and passed it across the table. He asked that we give this to you. You're under no obligation to read it or respond to it. Judge Williams took the envelope but didn't open it. I'll consider it. But I want to be clear about something. My goal has never been to destroy Officer Mason's career. My goal is to ensure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. If Officer Mason can genuinely learn from this experience and become a better officer because of it, then something positive can come from something terrible. Over the next few days, Judge Williams focused on her work. The Morrison fraud case concluded with a guilty verdict and she moved on to other cases. But in quiet moments, she thought about the letter from Derek Mason. Finally, one evening at home, she opened it. The letter was handwritten on plain paper. The writing was careful, as if Mason had taken his time with each word. Dear Judge Williams, I don't know if you will read this letter, and I understand if you don't. I don't deserve your time or attention after what I did to you, but I want you to know that I am deeply sorry for my actions on October 15th. For weeks, I told myself that I was just doing my job,